and welcome back to The Secret Mind. My name's Jules. I want to try an experiment. I'm going to try and narrate an audiobook. They're very popular nowadays. They're all about to be taken over by artificial intelligence chat robots. But it's a good way for me to maybe get through the books that are on my shelf waiting to be read. And I'm interested in it as an exercise to see if it's of any value to anybody. I picked a book that's just a very simple mystery, a pulp fiction, I think you might call it. When was it written? Probably the 1950s. Doesn't even say on the front cover. But this is the book, Every Man an Enemy. It's just a throwaway whodunit, I think. I've read it before. It's a book, one of the few books I've ever read 2 editions of. I bought it at 50p, not this edition. I don't know where that one is. And I liked it. And somehow, even though it's not the best book ever written, some books stick with you. There's a particular name of a character in this book that really stuck with me. It's a Sexton Blake mystery. Sexton Blake was a kind of a rip-off Sherlock Holmes. And I think they wrote dozens of these things. And this chap, W. Howard Baker, I've Googled him in the past, not recently. He wrote a batch of these. And they were just fun books, not particularly challenging, had a bit of a mystery to them. I remember the second time I read it, I wasn't blown away by the solution. I can't remember the solution again. I think it's in the style of an Agatha Christie. A bunch of people are suspects and one of them's guilty. It's not overplayed. It just is what it is. I'm sure it'll be dated. I did read the first chapter of it recently, although not in the last few months. And just with an idea of doing this, really. And now I'm going to read it. It should be fairly easy to read. It's not got too many pages. 139. I'm only giving you one chapter today. And if anybody's interested, I'll do more. It'll help me present my reading. I'm not going to take out any flubs and like I've just made there because I'm not set up for that yet. But I will be if there's any reason to do it. I don't think anybody's narrated this book before. Nobody will know the book. So it's just, that's what it is. That's my explanation of what's about to happen. So, Every Man an Enemy. And then I had the idea that I would put the text along, which I can't do because it's not available anywhere on Project Gutenberg. So I thought I'd do put it in the photographs of this presentation software I've got. So I've taken the pages and in case anybody wants to follow along. And then I've just had the idea that I might read it from there because I can see the screen at the same time. That might be a better experience for everybody concerned. Or worse, we're about to find out. This is Every Man an Enemy by W, if he pronounces the W, Howard Baker, a Sexton Blake thriller. Here we go. Harvey Innes was a parasitic growth on the publishing world. Harvey Innes was a literary spiv. To be more precise, he was sole owner and operator of the Innes Correspondence School. No sale, no fee. And he was the one-man senate, dean and faculty of the surefire school of successful authorship. 10,000 eager editors are waiting for your story. Surefire, no rejections. Be taught to write by the editor's friend. Innes was 39 years of age and rather shifty of eye. And already his thinning, black, patent leather hair was grey at the temples. It had started to go grey after the failure of a long line of unsuccessful ventures into the realms of big business. A Chinese laundry in Tottenham Court Road, and one of his lady friends had sought to further establish herself in his favour by telling him that it made him look intellectual and distinguished. Establish herself she duly did, if only briefly, for there was nothing Harvey Innes would rather do than look distinguished and intellectual. In fact, for months afterwards, he covertly assisted nature with dye. The truth was that Harvey ached to be the kind of man fashionable women look twice at and whisper about. But sadly and secretly, he certainly knew that he was fighting a battle already lost. Privately, he was glumly convinced that if fashionable women ever looked at him twice and whispered about him, it were because he was the one who hadn't used Amplex, which I believe is a deodorant or something from the 1960s. In his heart of hearts, Harvey knew he could never look distinguished and intellectual, but he went on trying. Only in the absolute seclusion of his cramped and dingy room above the cramped and dingy office of the Surefire School in Bloomsbury could he glower at his reflection in the fly-specked, spotted mirror and admit that the cruel vagaries of his life had left him with a dead pan. Only to himself, and even then only occasionally, usually when maudlin drunk, would he concede that his face just looked like something which had crawled up through his collar and died. Harvey's home and his office have been mentioned. They were rather down at heel. His secretary has not been mentioned, but she was rather down at heel too. She was a young woman by the name of Dolores, sometimes adenoidal, but always admiring, a thin, scrawny blonde. Harvey Innes always managed to make a living, but currently it was not an excessively prosperous one. The Surefire School provided him with bread, but for the butter and jam to go with it, he had to pin his hopes on his author's agency. And too often were these hopes disappointed. The sad fact was that the W. Somerset Maugham's, the Graham Greens, and the Agatha Christies had all been discovered before he had appeared on the literary scene, and those latter-day money spinners, the tough, hard-bitten creators of tough, hard-bitten spy stories, all sneered as they passed his portals by. It was all very discouraging. The only tough and hard-bitten character that Harvey knew was his landlord, who had a heart of flint, eyes like miniature rat holes, and a face of stone. Not for him the laughing, off-hand excuse when there was rent to be paid and unpayable. Not for him light, flippant talk of next week, or next month, or next year. Harvey Innes's landlord was a Greek, and he seemed to have an alarming number of overdeveloped, mean-looking male relatives interested in his financial welfare. Greeks, Harvey discovered too late for his peace of mind, hung together in bunches like bananas and regarded non-payment of rent almost as a national affront, something akin to a declaration of war. They came and they looked menacingly at Harvey. They leaned threateningly in his direction and breathed garlic all over him. It was most unsanitary. These then were the troubles of Harvey in late September. He wanted to have three things which he could not have. He wanted to appear intellectual, he wanted to appear distinguished, and he wanted to be rich. He never thought that each wistful wish could be granted. And then fate, in the guise of a walrus-faced postman, pushed the key to a fortune through his Bloomsbury letterbox, and briefly, Harvey was very happy indeed. He would be rich. He would appear to be intellectual. He would be distinguished. All his dreams were coming true. Actually, of course, as is so often the way with prankish fate, it was all a snare and a delusion. His last state, had he but known it, was going to be very, very much worse than his first. What made Harvey Innes happy was a manuscript, a wonderful manuscript of a wonderful novel. The book called 6 Pillows to Midnight, and the author was an unknown by the name of MacDonald Hall, and Harvey had only to read it once to know that it was a winner. Even with his insecure grasp of literary fundamentals, he knew a runaway bestseller when he saw one. It had more than enough sex to get an unfavourable mention in a current affairs column in the Sunday Express, particularly that it was also sufficiently avant-garde and unintelligible to garner rave reviews in the Observer. It should, without any doubt, be banned in Birmingham. So, after reading it, Harvey Innes parcelled it up with trembling hands and sent it off to John Bovis, the publisher, and relaxed to muse mistily on contracts and 15%. If Bovis should publish the novel, and if he did do well, He might even make £300 or £400 out of it as the author's agent, maybe even 500 or 6. There, Harvey's imagination stopped dead in its tracks, boggling for all it was worth. It refused to admit the existence of any possibility of any personal profit in excess of £600, not out of only one book, even a bestseller. Imagination turned traitor and refused to go any further. But John Bovis's report, when it came, allowed Harvey the luxury of sneering at his milksop imagination. Bovis was very pleased with Harvey's offering. He was very pleased with Harvey. Harvey was a credit to his profession. He was to be congratulated. Bovis would very much like to publish 6 Pillows to Midnight. He wished to publish it so much, in fact, that with Harvey's approval, he proposed to alter his schedules to get the book out immediately after Christmas. The first edition would be a very, very large one. Say 50,000 copies. Did Harvey approve? Did Harvey approve? He said 50,000 copies over and over again to himself and liked the sound of the number more every time. 50,000 copies in bound. It was almost unbelievable. And what would the paperback print order be after a send-off like that? It couldn't be much less than 500,000. Did he approve? He was delirious with joy. See, he told his craven, cowardly imagination, boggle at that. A second letter from Bovis had his imagination already reeling, flawed and out for the count. And Bovis had shown the manuscript of the book to Wilson Fox, the features editor of the Daily Post. Fox had been very impressed with it. The Post wished to serialise the story prior to its publication in book form. What did Harvey say to £10,000 for the serial rights? What did he say? He said yes, and quickly, before anyone could change their mind. An edition of 50,000 copies in hardcovers to sell at 25 shillings each, and Bovis was offering a royalty of 20%. That meant £12,500 for the unknown author MacDonald Hall, and at least 15% of that for himself. Add on his share as agent of the £10,000 the Daily Post was going to pay for serial rights, and he already stood to gain considerably more than the £2,000. Realise paperback rights, foreign publication rights, film rights, and television rights too, and 5,000, perhaps 6, even £7,000 might not see the end of Harvey's personal profit from 6 Pillows to Midnight. It was always possible that he might make very much more. He was beside himself. As MacDonald Hall was an unknown, he might quite legitimately push his share of the proceeds up from 15 to 20%, or 25 even. Then, instead of making £6,000 or £7,000, he'd make 13 or 14. It was at this juncture that a still, small voice deep within Harvey and his soul reminded him of something. The still, very small voice had to shout a couple of times to make itself heard, but finally Harvey got the quite dreadful message. It was something that he'd quite forgotten amidst all the excitement, and it was this. MacDonald Hall, the unknown author of 6 Pillows to Midnight, was well and truly unknown. Harvey didn't have his address. The fact was that the manuscript of the novel hadn't really been sent to him for submission to publishers at all. It had been sent to him for criticism. It hadn't come to Harvey Innes, author's agent. It had been addressed to the Surefire School. It had been sent to him only for criticism, nothing more. But he'd been so intoxicated with it that he had submitted it regardless. In any case, he told his querulous conscience, there was absolutely nothing to worry about. In the covering hall that had come with the manuscript, hadn't MacDonald Hall promised to call in and see him very shortly? He had, in black and white, so everything he was doing was for the best. MacDonald Hall, when he appeared, would be immensely grateful for everything he, Harvey Innes, had done for him. He might even say take 30% of the proceeds, or 40. No, go on, I insist. He might have done, if he had appeared. But he didn't appear. He didn't appear at all. not even after Harvey had discreetly advertised for him in the personal column of the Times. MacDonald Hall, Harvey had advertised. Urgent, re-establish contact, HI immediately. Ring Museum 98088. The number went unrung. Harvey worried. He had a bestseller on his hands. He had the makings of a much-needed small fortune within his grasp. To secure it, he required only that MacDonald Hall should saunter breezily into his office and sign his name to a few contracts. The book couldn't be published or serialized until he did. No money could change hands until he did. But he didn't. Harvey Innis had the manuscript of the Book of the Month, perhaps even the Book of the Year. But his last state was truly worse than his first. He hadn't the author of 6 Pillows to Midnight, and he didn't know where to find him.